Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Shannon Oldman, but please just call me Shannon. I am not a formal person. Um, I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about myself. I am an associate professor in the library science program at the University of Kentucky. I've taught there for about 10 years, and most of the classes I teach touch on intellectual freedom in some way. I also teach a course that focuses just on intellectual freedom and ethical issues. I also research these topics a lot. It's my main focus in my research, and I'm really passionate about intellectual freedom and privacy. Um, I do really enjoy talking about these topics, so outside of this presentation, if you need to bounce an idea off of me, you're having an issue, if you're looking for a speaker for something, get in touch with me and we'll see what we can do. I've also have two books about intellectual freedom. The one on the left came out in 2019, and The Fight Against Book Bans is coming out this spring. Just a little shameless plug there, I guess. So I want to start out by talking about the diversity of America. Every community in America is diverse. According to the 2020 census, the United States was less than 60% white, with other racial and ethnic categories making up the remainder. And I say this as a preface to the argument that we should have diverse books. We'll go through some of these statistics in a little more detail here. I do want to note that these categories are changing, and the proportion of each category is continually changing. In particular, the category of individuals who identify as white only tends to be shrinking in proportion to the other categories. So we're seeing, in other words, increasing diversity across the United States. This is true in terms of gender and sexuality as well. 71%, or 7.1, that should be 7.1, of US adults identify as LGBTQ. 21% of Gen Z, which is the younger generation, identifies as LGBT. And over 6 million Americans have a queer parent. It looks like some folks are not seeing slides. Are some people able to see the slides? Okay. Sounds like the slides are being shared, which is good. So hopefully, maybe leaving the room and coming back in will help. And the slides will be available later if you're not able to see them now. So this slide is about the diversity in terms of sexuality. And when all of these numbers are higher than they were previously, the percentage of adults and teens who identify as LGBTQ continues to increase as people become more comfortable expressing their sexuality in diverse ways. This is called the diversity wheel. It was originally created by Johns Hopkins University. And we can debate which specific categories should be included or not included, but the idea is to show to us that there are many facets of diversity in our country, in the world, and in our communities. The inner ring of categories are things that are not under your control. They are just how you are born, or sort of innate characteristics, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Things like your race and ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your national origin. You don't have control over where you originate from. The outer ring is categories that are more in our control, that are changeable and flexible over time. Things like our religion, our appearance, our political beliefs, our language and communication skills, and so on. And these things, these different categories, different facets of people change over time, but there are also ways that we vary from one another, and are different ways to think of diversity. It's not just the United States that is increasingly diverse. It is the state of Kentucky as well. Kentucky in 2021 was about 87.1% white. That is a change from previous years. The numbers of LGBTQ individuals in Kentucky are similar to those nationwide. We have a similar proportion. And again, I want to note that diversity across the state continues to increase. Even in small towns, there's increasing diversity in small towns. As an anecdote, I grew up in a small town in Iowa of about 4,000 people. I realize that's not a small town to some counties in Kentucky. But when I was growing up, I don't know that there were any people of color in my community. If there are certainly very few. But that has changed in the time since I was a child. There's now a growing population of Hispanic individuals and families. There are Black families there, and in fact, a wide diversity of people in terms of race and ethnicity, as well as sexuality. And so I just tell that story to demonstrate that these small towns do change over time. And even if you think your small town, your little community has no diversity, we need to stop and think about the fact that some people will leave your town, especially young people. We know there's an increasing percentage of young people who leave their small communities once they finish high school. Those young people will meet diverse people in the workforce or in college. And so they need to be prepared for how to interact with diverse people, different worldviews, different perspectives. And in fact, they may become friends with people who are different from their home community. They may marry people different from who they grew up with. And not only do young people need to be prepared for encountering diverse people in their lives, but so do folks back in the small town. If Joey grows up in a small town, moves away, and gets married to George and brings George home for the holidays, folks in the small town are going to need to be welcoming and respectful and tolerant. And having diverse books helps build that sort of community. So let's break it down a little bit more. What do diverse books do? One thing that we know from research is diverse books help generate an increased understanding of others. Those who read more diverse books have greater compassion and empathy for people who are different from them. And I'm saying diverse books here sort of as a catch-all. Really what I mean when I say diverse books is books that don't have a standard white male protagonist. Books that have a different worldview. Books where maybe people of color are the main protagonists, the main characters. Or someone from the LGBTQ community is one of the main characters, or those sorts of plot lines are the main plots within the books. It can also include diverse religions, diverse political beliefs, and so on. You can think back to that diversity wheel I showed a few slides ago. So diverse books is really sort of a shorthand for just including a wide range of books with a really variable perspectives, authors, protagonists. Another impact of diverse books has to do with the impact on people from traditionally marginalized communities. It's really validating and empowering to see or read stories of people like ourselves. Sometimes you'll hear a phrase like, if you don't see it, how can you dream it or hope to achieve it? And oftentimes we'll hear people say, I didn't realize someone who was Hispanic could be an astronaut until I saw a Hispanic astronaut. So that's really empowering to read and hear stories of people like ourselves in different roles, different positions. And there's also research that says people feel safer, more resilient when they have access to LGBTQ resources. I just got a notice that closed captioning was available, so we'll see if it turns on. I don't know. This is true not only for LGBTQ folks, but folks from different traditionally marginalized communities and groups. They feel more resilient and they feel empowered and validated when they have access to resources that talk about themselves or talk about people like themselves. I also want to mention the importance of having respect for others. Reading diverse books helps us learn about the perspectives of others and helps us learn to respect that different people have different experiences and see things in different ways. This always makes me think of this past summer when I read the book All American Boys. It's set in an urban community and it's about a Black teen boy's interaction with the police and how different people in the community view that interaction and interpret that interaction. It's written by a Black man and a white man, and they take turns telling the story from different perspectives. And it was very insightful to see how different people view a situation, an incident in different ways because they're coming with different histories, different cultural backgrounds. And one view is not necessarily more correct than the other. They're just different interpretations. And we need to have respect for others who have different experiences and different worldviews. This book is a really great one for teaching that to teens. So why am I talking about diverse books? Why am I bringing this up and why am I hammering home the importance of having diverse books? It starts with the fact that book challenges are on the rise across the country. And anecdotally within the state of Kentucky too. So in 2021, the last year for which we have numbers, ALA reported 729 challenges against almost 1,600 books. That's the highest numbers they've ever recorded since they started keeping track over 20 years ago. Now, I also want to note they think that about 80 to 95% of book challenges go unreported. So the number is probably actually much higher than 729 challenges. Likewise, during 21 and 2022, during a 9-month span, PEN America recorded 1,500 bans in school libraries. And we've seen book challenges and bans in every state across the United States. When I was working on my latest book, I wrote to the state librarian of every state in the US and asked about book challenges and bans. And no one questioned my statement that there have been a lot of challenges in your state. So in other words, there are a lot of challenges in every state going on right now. Um, it's a simple fact and it's a troubling fact. Furthermore, not only are there challenges going on across every state, but there are a lot of similarities in these challenges. The same books are challenged over and over using the same language, nearly identical language across different places. And the same objections are repeated, often word for word, and different images from graphic novels or phrases are taken out of context, and it is implied that they are pornographic or offensive. Now, these are the top 10 most challenged books from the New York Times, that the New York Times stated. And these are the 5 books that are some of the most challenged books. The Hate U Give is about racial tension, and it's aimed at high school. But the other 4 books that I have circled are about LGBTQ themes. And some of them are graphic novels, and some of them have illustrations. And again, the images from these books or certain phrases, certain storylines are taken out of context and used to claim that the books are offensive. Now you may think, so what if there are different challenges occurring across the United States and there are a lot of similarities? These look like grassroots challenges. And grassroots means that it's political activity that is organic from the bottom up. It's a group of local citizens who are upset about something and they start to raise a ruckus. And it's independent of influence from political elites. But actually, this is astroturfing. If you're familiar with astroturf from sports, it's fake grass that's put down, it's fake turf that's put down to imitate actual grass. So astroturfing in this context is the use of the appearance of a grassroots movement, even though there's political elites operating behind the scenes. In this case, we have groups like the Koch brothers, the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, and others, political elites as well, sort of coordinating the movements of these groups like Moms for Liberty or No Left Turn in Education. There are local chapters of these groups all over the country, but they're being coordinated at a national level. I think it's important for us to recognize that, because we're not just looking at half a dozen angry moms in your town, but they're getting their information and their tactics, their approach from a national organization. So it's going to be harder to reason with them. Now, underlying these challenges for these books are a few fundamental concerns. First, there's opposition to public institutions. We see this in challenges to public schools, challenges to public libraries. There's a segment of the population in the US right now that would prefer we not spend taxpayer money on public institutions. And so we see some of that opposition in the background behind these book challenges. There's also some religious conservatism that tends to think my way is the right way, every other way is wrong, every other way is problematic. And really this is about a fear of change and diversity, which is why I started out this presentation talking about the increasing diversity and the increasing change we see in our state and in our country. Some people really don't like those changes. And as a result, that is what leads them to the book challenges and the push for book bans. Of course, for other people, this change, this increase in diversity is incredibly welcome. It means that people are being seen and heard, understood and respected, maybe for the first time in their lives. And I want to thank the Institute of Museum and Library Services for sponsoring this conference and giving me this opportunity to talk. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mary Landrum now.
Hi, thank you all so much for being here today, and I would like to thank Shannon for being a part of this presentation with me. I've learned a lot by working with her. I definitely recommend that if you are faced with a challenge in your library that you contact Shannon. So what I'm going to do today is kind of help you put the ideas Shannon has talked about into practice. My name is Mary Landrum. My pronouns are she and her, and I am here to represent the Kentucky Public Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee. My goal today is to give you some practical tools you can use when the challenges Shannon described come your way. As she mentioned, the American Library Association, PEN America, and other organizations report that book challenges are at an all-time high. Should you face one yourself, the Intellectual Freedom Committee at KPLA is here to give you support on the state level. Okay. So I think we all know these are contentious times. That's a bit of an understatement. There are some people who just want to complain and be heard. Others will want to argue, but this is not a time to argue. You really might want to argue, but we've got to keep calm and carry on. A few months ago, my manager shared an article from the Programming Librarian website, I think, that had some really helpful de-escalation techniques. It is down here in the source. And I think that these are also techniques to use when you are facing a complainer or a book challenger. One of the most important things to do before you even start talking is to ground yourself. Take that deep breath. Create a safe space for you and the staff around you. Your goal is to end a disruption or to keep one from breaking out in the first place. Then you want to assess your surroundings for safety. Are you facing one person, or is there a crowd complaining about this book? Do you have library security? If so, are they nearby? Can you call on coworkers for backup? So once you're ready to begin the conversation, you want to show that you are listening. Say something like, well, it sounds like you have a lot of concerns. Let's talk about them. Listen to those complaints, and as one of my mentors here at the Lexington Public Library taught me, smile and nod your head. Hold your arms in front of your body and think about your body language and what it is communicating. Acknowledge those complaints, offer a solution if you have one, and take notes to demonstrate that you're taking those concerns seriously. Do some active listening by restating the customer's concerns to indicate your understanding. Say something like, well, it sounds like you're really concerned about this. And let me make sure I've understood you correctly. You don't think this book is appropriate for children. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Now, hopefully you can have a peaceful conversation. If the person does get abusive, though, you don't have to take that. You can tell them, it's not okay to talk to me like that. It's not okay to talk to my staff like that. And if you keep doing that, I will have to ask you to leave the library. Now, once you have taken these steps, if they do want to forge ahead with the formal complaint, it's time to follow your library's procedures for handling challenges. And please review those with your staff and with your managers, because those are going to be different at every library. And our next step is going to be to review a checklist to help you get ready for challenges. I recently attended a webinar presented by the American Library Association's Graphic Novels and Comics Roundtable. They use challenge books in those formats as their examples, but I think their checklist can help you prepare for a challenge to any and all books or materials. Christina Daffrin from the Russell County Public Library, is on the Intellectual Freedom Committee. She created a really nice handout for this checklist. It's in the Google folder that Amy created for this session. along with some other documents that I hope will help you. So, some things to consider before you have a challenge. Prepare yourself. Do you have a selection policy at your library? At my library, we call it the collection development policy. Do you have a separate challenge policy? Have you outlined steps for how you're going to respond to a challenge? If you don't, create one. And compare your policy models. Look at what other libraries have. And this is where I want to mention that KDLA has some really helpful sample policies on their website. As you're doing that, you want to identify the stakeholders in your library system. Who are going to make the decisions about this book challenge? Who is going to decide what will be done about the book in question? And pay attention to those books that are being challenged around the country, some of the ones that Shannon talked about. If they're being challenged in Texas and Tennessee and Florida, there's a good chance that those national organizations have gotten them on the radar of people in your community. That way you can prepare for a challenge that is specific to that book. So the challenge is here. One of the things you're going to do to address it is look at what are the reviews of the book. Can you make an argument about why you should have the book and which section it should be in? Then you can ask yourself, does this book fill a need? Does it have an audience in your community? And as Shannon said, our communities are growing more diverse, so chances are it does fill a need. Even if you think it may not, it's going to help build that empathy and compassion that young small town folks can take with them when they leave those communities and then come back. Has its literary merit been recognized with awards? Does it fill an information need? Once you've collected all of this information, you can make your case that this book, it's not trash, it's not offensive, it's not porn. Well, it may offend someone, but you can make the challenge that, or you can make the case that it is worthy of being on the library shelves. And who are your community supports? You don't need to go this alone. Contact the Intellectual Freedom Committee, contact KDLA, find your advocates in the community. At last week's KLA conference, we talked a lot about your uppercase friends. Will the friends of the library support you? And your lowercase friends. Think about your friends who love to talk about how much they love the public library. This is a great time to activate them. And report the challenge to ALA's Office of Intellectual Freedom. ALA.org, there is a challenge report form that you can fill out to get support from them. Please be advised that they are inundated with challenges and may take some time to get back to you, but your report will go into those statistics that they create. So after the challenge, win, lose, or draw, thank the people who helped you because you might need them again. Update your policies where you need to strengthen them against future challenges. And finally, prepare yourself for future challenges by asking, are there materials similar to your challenged book that may also trigger a challenge? Genderqueer was challenged in our community. Do we have All Boys Aren't Blue? Do we have Beyond Magenta? How are we going to prepare to defend those books? And finally, this was one of my favorite phrases from that webinar, live to library another day. You're not alone. There is a community in your town, in your county, and here statewide that is here to support you. So let's go back to the topic of parents complaining. You may have a parent complaining that a certain book is not appropriate for their child, that it is not an appropriate material, that they are not appropriate materials for young people. And not all patrons are going to go through the process of filing that formal challenge. Some of them just want to complain, to vent, to get something off their chest. And I hope some of these talking points will be able to help you if someone comes to you with this concern. Let's say someone says to you that they don't think All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson should be in the teen section. Listen to their concerns, and then you might say something like, well, it sounds like this book isn't right for your family. A parent may say that they can't believe we're having a pride prom for teens at our local branch library. Listen to their concerns and say, well, it sounds like that program isn't right for your child. Let's find some options that work for you. Do a good reference interview, find out what they are interested in reading, help them find those books. Look at your events calendar and see if there is an event that is going to be appropriate for their child in their mind. If they continue, you can say, you know, I understand if you don't want your child to read this book, that's absolutely fine. But there are other parents who may think it's okay for their child to read it. Let's find a book that's a better fit for your family. Again, that's hearing those concerns, saying, hey, this book isn't for you, I get it. We're going to find something that is for you. And many of the groups that Shannon mentioned will cite parental rights as their reason for challenging books. They argue that as a parent, they have the right to decide what their kids read. True, but they don't have the right to decide what other parents let their children read. That parent does not get to decide what my sister's children read. So when that argument comes up, you can say something like, you know, as a parent, you do have the right to guide your own children's reading, but parents should not be making decisions for other parents' children. I saw that particular last bullet point in a tweet from the American Library Association's president during Banned Books Week. And I think it's a good response to people who express concern about what children are reading. And you can thank that person for being concerned about children to diffuse their situation. I am a children's librarian, so it's going to be easy for me to make common ground and say, hey, I absolutely understand that you're concerned about what children read. You just have to remind them that when it comes to making that decision, they don't get to make it for other people's children. These are some more talking points that I hope will help you. You can remind them that libraries provide materials presenting all points of view on current and historical issues. We serve diverse communities, so our collections will be diverse. And we don't remove materials because one person disapproves of them. Again, remind them that public libraries embrace the needs of all people in the community. And if this is one of those people who is expressing concerns from a background of religious conservatism, work with them to identify titles that are in line with their beliefs, or maybe to add some titles. When we are thinking that the library includes everyone, I have to remind myself, even people I don't agree with need to have their opinions reflected in the library. And if you're like me, you don't see the parent of every child who comes in your door. I see a lot of unsupervised children. You may also be in a school library where it's the child returning a book to you. We might just be hearing from a kid who is repeating their parents' opinions. I got a great example of how to respond to those kids from School Library Journal's Scales on Censorship column, and I highly recommend it as a way to prepare for challenges. A reader wrote in to ask, how do I answer a student who returns a book and says his mother doesn't want him to read it and that it shouldn't be in the library? I thought this was a great response. Well, thank you for returning this book. And I understand if your mother doesn't want you to read the book, that's fine. But parents of some of the other students will think it's okay for them to read it. Let's find something you think your mom will let you read. Again, present yourself as a partner to help that family find the reading materials that work for them. And finally, as hard as it is, and I speak to myself here, avoid sharing your personal opinions. Stick to the facts, stick to the policies. If we share our opinions, we might just end up adding fuel to the flame. Now, I want to leave you with an example that was shared with me at the KPLA conference back in March. After a session the committee did, a librarian came to me and told me that they had a parent ask them, do I have to read the whole book to know if it's porn? Do I have to read the entire book to find out if it's okay for my kid? And the answer is absolutely not. If someone comes to you with these questions, emphasize that we use review sources to talk about or to decide whether or not we are going to choose a book. That sends the message that we've got processes and standards in place, that we make our decisions carefully, that we aren't ordering willy-nilly. Walk them through the websites that we use when we're choosing books. Explain to them that the reviews will tell you what the book is about, give you any trigger or content warnings, and give you a good idea of the best age group for the book. Some of the sources I depend on a lot are Kirkus, School Library Journal, the Horn Book, and Common Sense Media. Common Sense Media is actually targeted at parents, whereas Kirkus and the others are really more for librarians and booksellers. So I would definitely recommend Common Sense Media to your parents. One thing I would add, when all of this comes down, you want to stay calm in the moment. And I give myself this advice about 97 times a day. I have to stay calm in the library. I have to stay calm in the moment. When I'm driving home, that's when I blast Foo Fighters. After the interaction, that's when I go to my desk, put in my headphones, and listen to Nirvana. Do whatever works for you. Chocolate is often involved in my stress response as well. Just make sure that you are giving yourself time to let go of those negative emotions so you can live to library another day. Okay, and thank you so much. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have more questions. This is my work email address, but since I submitted the slides, the Intellectual Freedom Committee created an email address that you can use to reach us. All of the members have access to it. So I'm going to type that into the chat, and thank you again. Have a good day, everyone.
Well, thank you very much both to Shannon and to Mary for your presentations. If you guys have any questions for Mary or Shannon or both, now is the time to type them in the chat. You can open the chat bubble by clicking on the arrows at the lower right-hand corner of the screen to open the Collaborate panel, and then click on the chat bubble icon to type in your question. And Mary has just added the email for the Intellectual Freedom Committee. That is intellectualfreedomcommitteeky@gmail.com if you have questions for the Intellectual Freedom Committee for KPLA.